I don't care. I don't care.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. Holy smokes, was that intense. So what did we learn last night at the debate? Well, America deserves better. That's the first and most obvious thing we learned. All kinds of people said that today, and they were right. This is a great country. The most decent people in the world live here. We ought to be proud of the fact that we're Americans. Proud of our culture, proud of our history. Most of us want it all to continue. We want the nation our grandchildren inherit to be as stable and as happy as the country we grew up in. But last night's debate gave us little confidence that will happen. It was a painful, highly depressing 90 minutes. At times, things seemed out of control. We could go on about it, but you saw it, so you know what it was like. That's the overview. But as a political matter, the main thing we learned last night is that it was a mistake to spend so much time focusing on Joe Biden's mental decline. Yes, it's real. Yes, Joe Biden is fading. We've showed you dozens of examples of it for months now. But on stage last night, Biden did not seem senile. If you tuned in expecting him to forget his own name, what? And honestly, we did expect that, you may have been surprised by how precise some of his answers were. Not all of them, but enough of them. Trump isn't going to win this race by calling Joe Biden senile. Nor, by the way, is Joe Biden going to win this race by calling Donald Trump a racist, as he repeatedly did last night. That slander didn't work 4 years ago. It will not work now. Because personal attacks rarely work. They rarely determine election outcomes. That's obvious if you look at the results, but it's easy to forget it, and many did.
What?
What matters always, to voters anyway, is what you do, not what you say. Right now, many would like to see someone defend the country. America has never been under fiercer attack than it is now. Virtually all of the attackers come from the domestic left. They're Democrats. They are Biden voters. I am the Democratic Party, Joe Biden reminded us last night. That's true. It should be enough to keep Trump in office. The Democratic Party has become more radical than any major party in the history of the country. Its leaders plan to dismantle our system, the system our founders created centuries ago, a system that countless other countries have envied so much they copied. Democrats want to do away with it. They want to abolish the Electoral College. They're trying to end traditional Election Day voting. They intend to invalidate the filibuster and guarantee permanent control of the House and the Senate by admitting D.C. and Puerto Rico into the Union. We'll have 52 states, and the Democrats will be in charge forever. That is their plan. We're not making it up. They've said it.
Oh, my God.
Scariest of all, they're planning to hijack the Supreme Court by expanding the number of justices. Leading Democrats have openly endorsed this idea. It's not a small change. It would end our third branch of government. The judiciary would cease dispensing justice. It would instead become an instrument of partisan power politics wielded exclusively on behalf of one party. How'd you like to live in a country like that? It's horrifying. Joe Biden was asked about this last night. Here's how it went.
Are you willing to tell the American people tonight whether or not you will support either ending the filibuster or packing the court?
Whatever position I take on that, that'll become the issue. The issue is the American people should speak. You should go out and vote. You're in voting now. Vote and let your senators know how strongly you feel. Vote now.
Are you pack the
Make
court?
sure you, in fact, let people know
He doesn't want
you're
to
a
answer the
senator.
question.
I'm not going to answer the question
Why wouldn't you answer that
because
question?
the question
you want to put a lot of
the
new
question
Supreme
is
Court justice,
the
radical
question,
left.
Will you
Who
shut
is your,
up, man?
Listen,
Yes! That's awesome!
So there are a couple of things to note about the exchange you just saw. Nobody forced Biden to answer the question, a key question, and that was frustrating to watch. But it was also easy to interpret what he meant. Of course Joe Biden plans to pack the Supreme Court. Otherwise, he would have denied it. Court packing is not popular with the public. Nearly 70% of Americans oppose it. That includes more than half of all registered Democrats. But the extremists who now run the Democratic Party are demanding it.
I heard that. I wish I didn't hear that, but I just heard that.
And Joe Biden will follow their lead. That's what radicalism looks like. Anything that stands between you and the power you seek, you destroy, even if it's the world's oldest constitutional court, which our Supreme Court is. We should be afraid of people who are willing to do things like that. But in Joe Biden's case, we don't seem to be afraid. And that leads to something else that we learned last night at the debate. Tone is everything. Biden all but admitted on stage that he plans to tear down our system.
What an idiot! Oh, what a loser!
But he did it in a calm, this is your captain speaking voice. Biden seemed almost reassuring even as he hinted at revolution. Donald Trump, by contrast, defended our system, the system that most people in this country support. Nothing Trump said on stage was radical. Virtually nothing he ever says is radical, at least if you compare it to public opinion polling on the issues. It's his tone that rattles people. Trump could make a wine list sound menacing. And so in the end, amazingly, tragically, many people watching last night may have concluded that Joe Biden is the stable, steady alternative. They concluded this even as Joe Biden suggested that he plans to change their lives, their country, permanently and forever in ways they won't like. It's quite a trick. The illusion of reasonableness. Barack Obama was the master of this. Biden learned well. And so he continued last night. Watch Joe Biden explain that actually he's the America First candidate.
It would create an additional $1 trillion in economic growth because it would be about buying American. That we're going to make this federal government spend $600 billion a year on everything from ships to steel to buildings and the like. And under my proposal, we're going to make sure that every penny of that has to be made by a company
but respectfully,
in America.
sir.
We've got to buy American. Buy American, says the man who welcomed China into the World Trade Organization and has been sucking up assiduously to its leaders ever since.
Nice.
Fight the billionaire, says the man whose campaign is funded by oligarchs on Wall Street and in Silicon Valley. Joe Biden stole Donald Trump's lines. It was remarkable. How was Biden able to do that? Well, the Trump campaign should ruminate on that question.
I like turtles.
Trump's advisors/in-laws are telling him to brag about the number of people he has let out of prison. This at a time when our crime rate is exploding and people are dying as a result of it. Joe Biden's advisors plan to let many more people out of prison, but they're not bragging about it on stage. No, they're hiding it. Instead, they use the debate to talk up a Buy America program they will never implement. What we learn here is the Biden people are very serious about politics. They know what the public wants, even if they plan to ignore it if they're elected. And of course, they're willing to say anything. That helps. That's another thing we learned last night. We learned that, quote, white supremacy is now the single greatest threat to our country. How can that be, you ask? Well, it turns out that mobs of white supremacists just burned down Minneapolis and then Kenosha. They trashed Portland and Seattle. They shot cops in Louisville. They torched Wendy's. They cleaned up the Nike store. They destroyed public monuments in Atlanta and San Francisco. They defaced war memorials in Washington. They looted Macy's in Midtown Chicago. Also in the city of Chicago, white supremacists murdered hundreds of African Americans. And everywhere they went, these right-wing bigots spray-painted racist graffiti on buildings.
Oh my God.
And threatened sleeping citizens in their homes. The white supremacists did this. You saw it all on TV. Damn those Proud Boys. It was bewildering to listen to all of this. It wasn't just factually untrue. No, it was insane. It was crazier than any conspiracy that Google has ever banned. Yet they're now demanding that you believe it, and if you don't believe it, they're going to punish you.
Spicy meat. Yeah, boy.
So why are they doing that? That's a good question. It's also an ominous sign. If they can make you accept a lie that ridiculous, what do they plan to do next? Maybe someone will ask that question in the next debate. Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson. Tonight there was a horrifying, we're sad to tell you, a horrifying amount of violence in the United States over the weekend, as increasingly there is. Over just 2 days, at least 104 Americans were shot to death in major American cities. That's a lot. How many? Well, for perspective, on the single deadliest day of the Iraq War, that would be January of 2005, a total of 37 Americans died. So what's happening in our cities right now looks a lot like a war, even if we rarely acknowledge it.
Oh my God.
Dallas, Milwaukee, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, many other metro areas recorded murders over the weekend. That's typical now. In St. Louis, 13 people were shot, 5 of them fatally. In Chicago, 33 were gunned down, 5 of those died. In Laguna Woods, California, a Chinese immigrant from Las Vegas walked into a Presbyterian church and shot 6 elderly Taiwanese parishioners. Police say he was motivated by some kind of political and ethnic hatred. And of course, most famously of all, on Saturday afternoon, a teenager in a mock military uniform walked into a grocery store in Buffalo and shot more than a dozen strangers with a rifle. No doubt you've seen accounts of this on the news. What you probably haven't seen are details about any of the 10 Americans who were murdered in that store in Buffalo. You may not even know their names, much less who they were or who they loved. Most of them were black. We know that. But beyond the way they look, not a lot has been reported about them, because the coverage hasn't been about them. Nor, in fact, has it really been about the gunman. He was an 18-year-old called Peyton Gendron. Gendron was mentally ill. Everyone around him knew that, including his teachers and the local police. Less than a year ago, Gendron was committed to a mental hospital after threatening to murder his classmates at a school graduation ceremony. So on Saturday, after he made good on his long-standing threat to open fire into a crowd, Gendron left an 180-page letter that he said would explain his motives. You've probably heard this document described as a racist manifesto. But that's not quite right. It's definitely racist, bitterly so. Gendron reduces people to their skin color. That's the essence of racism, and it's immoral. But what he wrote does not add up to a manifesto. It is not a blueprint for a new extremist political movement, much less the potential inspiration for a racist revolution. Anyone who claims that it is lying or hasn't read it. Instead, Gendron's letter is a rambling pastiche of slogans and internet memes, some of which flatly contradict one another. The document is not recognizably left-wing or right-wing. It's not really political at all. The document is crazy. It's the product of a diseased and organized mind. At one point, Gendron suggests that Fox News is part of some global conspiracy against him. He writes like the mental patient he is, disjointed, irrational, paranoid. Now, that's true, not that it makes the atrocities he committed easier to bear. If your daughter was murdered on Saturday in Buffalo, you wouldn't care why the killer did it or who he voted for.
Well, shit.
But the truth about Peyton Gendron does tell you a lot about the ruthlessness and dishonesty of our political leadership. Within minutes of Saturday's shooting, before all of the bodies of those 10 murdered Americans had even been identified by their loved ones, professional Democrats had begun a coordinated campaign to blame those murders on their political opponents. They did it, they said, immediately. Patron Gendron was the heir to Donald Trump, they told us.
Whoa.
Trumpism committed mass murder in Buffalo. And for that reason, it followed logically, we must suspend the First Amendment. That's hardly an exaggeration of what they're saying. Here's a selection from yesterday's Sunday shows.
Social media companies and law enforcement have not done enough to monitor, to ban, to restrict, and to limit hate speech on their sites. Wow. Hate speech is not freedom of speech.
As you know, the First Amendment does not protect hate speech.
I'll protect the First Amendment any day of the week, but you don't protect hate speech. You don't protect incendiary speech. You're not allowed to scream fire in a crowded theater. There are limitations on speech, and right now we have seen this run rampant.
So what is hate speech? Well, it's speech that our leaders hate. So because a mentally ill teenager murdered strangers, you cannot be allowed to express your political views out loud.
Yes.
That's what they're telling you. That's what they've wanted to tell you for a long time. But Saturday's massacre gives them a pretext, a justification. You have to ask yourself, who behaves like that? What sort of person uses mass murder as an excuse to give a campaign speech or seize more political power? We'll find out tomorrow when Joe Biden travels to the scene of this atrocity in Buffalo to speak to the country. We haven't seen an advanced copy of his remarks, but we can guess what we will hear.
Wow!
Biden's approval rating appears to be the lowest ever recorded for a president this century, lower than Donald Trump's. That is a disaster for his party. The Democratic Party will suffer for this in this fall's elections. Biden still has time to change course and fix it. He could try to improve the lives of voters who are dissatisfied with him. That is entirely possible. That's what politicians typically do when they're down. They listen to the people who might reelect them. But Biden doesn't plan to do that, and we know for a fact because Politico just reported it.
What? Yes!
Instead, Biden has decided to attack people who disapprove. According to Politico, quote, Biden has taken to telling his aides that he no longer recognizes the GOP, which he now views as an existential threat to the nation's democracy. End quote.
Electric chair.
People who disagree with Joe Biden, according to Joe Biden, are now a, quote, existential threat to the nation, like al-Qaeda or climate change. A threat that by definition is so profound we must declare war upon it if we're to survive.
Buckle up, baby. Are you kidding me?
Now, keep in mind, this threat that Biden is referring to is you. He's talking about his fellow Americans. No president has ever spoken like this, ever. Joe Biden does it regularly, and he's certain to do it again tomorrow. But most painful and destructive of all, Biden is likely to use racial wounds in order to make his point. There is no behavior worse than this. All race politics is bad, no matter what flavor those politics happen to be. No race politics is better than any other. All of it is poison.
Oh, snap.
Race politics subsumes the individual into the group. It erases people. It dehumanizes them. Race politics elevates appearance over initiative and decency and all the other God-given qualities that makes every person of every color unique, yet morally equal to every other person. And above all, race politics always makes us hate each other, and always in a very predictable way. So let's say you were to make identity politics mandatory in your country, as they have.
Huh?
How could you be surprised when that leads, as it inevitably will, to white identity politics? Well, you could not be surprised. You did it, and it was always going to happen. And then what happens next? Nothing good.
Huh?
Race politics is a sin. Race politics always leads to violence and death. They learned that lesson in Rwanda in 1994. Identity politics ended in genocide in Rwanda that killed 800,000 people.
Tender and mild.
And in response to those horrors, the Rwandans did something that we might learn from. They moved in the opposite direction from the one that Joe Biden is currently taking in the United States. Quote, ethnicity has already been stripped out of school books and rubbed off government identity cards, reported the New York Times. Government documents no longer mention Hutu or Tutsi, and the country's newspapers and radio stations steer clear of the labels as well. Most dramatic is how Rwanda's 8 million people now shun the identifications, the racial identifications, that seemed to loom so large 10 years ago as Hutu extremists began their mass killings, end quote.
Oh my God! Wow!
They have de-emphasized race in Rwanda, intentionally and systematically. Rwandan citizens are citizens first, members of racial or tribal groups second or not at all. Result? There have been no more genocides in Rwanda. And that could easily be the path forward for this country, too. There was only one answer to rising racial tension, and that's to de-escalate and do what we have done and tried to do for hundreds of years, which is work toward colorblind meritocracy and treat people as human beings created by God, rather than as faceless members of interest groups that might benefit some political party or other. We have a moral duty to do this because all people have equal moral value, no matter what they look like. All lives matter, period.
Bruh.
That's not the determination of the U.S. government. That's the determination of God, and it's true. And most Americans already believe it. They would like to see a return to the American way of life. And the American way of life is meritocracy. Judge me by what I do, not by how I look, by the content of my character, not the color of my skin. We have a monument on the mall to this. And yet suddenly, every voice in power is leading us in the opposite direction. And what's the terminus of that journey? It's destruction. Everybody knows this. Only our leaders stand in the way of fixing a problem that is growing worse by the day.
The trial for the alleged source of the notorious Steele dossier continuing in D.C. this week. Special counsel John Durham grilling the FBI over its use of unverified information to secure that FISA warrant against the Trump campaign. Durham asking, quote, you didn't have corroboration from FBI databases, from other intelligence community agencies, or from Christopher Steele, and it still went into a FISA application? To which the FBI analyst responded, correct. Fox News contributor Laura Trump is here to react. Laura, Sure, your family is irate.
Yeah, well, Ainsley, this is just more of the same. Yet again, something that Donald Trump talked about years ago, and don't forget was mocked and ridiculed for, was actually true. I mean, this is shocking to hear that this sort of thing, and look, we all have seen the damage that the FBI has done to its own reputation just recently in the unprecedented and unnecessary raid.
President of the USA has been fired by the political event. So where then there is a Carlson asked a question to the Mr. Biden, so that what was the reason of the careless? So he said that, oh, I think that I'm the good leader, not Donald Trump. So especially that man cannot handle it, so they can shoot him. That's it. And Donald Trump is killed in a like मरते मरते बचाए वो, ठीक है ना, ऐसा बोलते हैं हम लोग भाषा में, like means died once or there is a bullet if 1 inch side in the right side, then Donald Trump was killed in that session. But whether he is lucky or I think the shooter is not professional shooter, I think that so much, because the professional shooter killed him very perfectly, because yeah, they had an open chance there to make their, so I think there is a very famous there is a famous and where is they come from the sticker city, and this is the gun. So I think when the Donald Trump has been killed, I'm very what's much that that fire wasn't by that man. It was a very deep plan to kill Joe Biden. Yes, it is a plan. I think that it is a plan of the opposition leader, like Joe Biden, who is now the president of the US. So, the help of the Americans, people, is very lucky. Either that or this. People are coming from all over the world, from all over the internet. People are supporting Donald Trump because they like him, because Donald Trump is a good leader for the world and the USA. Yeah, he's calm, cool, composed, and do everything for his nation. Yeah, one interview I heard that Donald Trump that he said that I want to live without the desert, but you cannot go to the desert. So I think that's the political party's power was the Donald Trump had. And the Donald Trump is a special character, you know. Yeah, he is the special character person of the city for the USA.